Namo Namaha, Swagatam Sarvebhyaha. So to wrap up our unit on the second level verbal forms, I wanted to turn to one additional form that we can learn that's going to be very useful at this stage in our Sanskrit learning because it's going to help us to construct Sanskrit sentences that'll impress our friends. It'll help us gain more and more confidence in our abilities. It's also really useful if you never know, you might happen to find yourself having to speak in Sanskrit. It's not going to happen a lot, I know, but maybe you'll be on a plane and you'll be sitting next to a pandit or maybe a fellow Sanskrit aficionado. And if you can speak with them in Sanskrit, it's kind of a neat thing. So you never know. What I do want to discuss in the video is the idea of the verbal noun, how we can use it, and some of the different forms that verbal nouns take. In particular, what I like to call the ana form. The lyut pratyaya. As you remember, there's 4 kinds of words in the Sanskrit language. First, we have verbs, right? Verbs are formed off of dhatus, these roots, and they describe actions, and you have to conjugate them, right? Based on person, number, class, voice. In Sanskrit, we refer to verbs as kriyapadas, sometimes tingantas. Then there's the nouns or pronominals. These are called the namans, sarvanamas in Sanskrit. These are entities, right? People, places, things that get declined in one of 7 different cases, vibhaktis. They'll have 3 genders, masculine, feminine, neuter, and they'll be in 3 numbers, right? Singular, dual, plural. The third kind of word is the visheshana, the adjective. Right? This is going to be a modifier to a noun or a pronoun, and it has to agree in person, gender, and case with the noun that it modifies. So if you had an old monkey, the adjective for old, vruddha, would have to agree with the gender, number, and case of the noun, the monkey, the vanaraha. So vruddha, vanaraha. Vruddhena, vanarena, by the old monkey. If you had an old fly, it would be vruddha makshika. It's feminine. Vruddhasu makshika su, in or among or with respect to the 3 or more flies. The 4th kind of word is the indeclinable, the adverbial, if you will. It's called the avyaya, which means it doesn't decline, it doesn't conjugate, it stays the same. And it tends to modify directly the verb. So you can have aham gacchami, I go, aham shighram gacchami, I go quickly. Here, the indeclinable shighram is going to be adverbial, and it modifies how we go, but it always is going to stay shighram. It's never going to change even if the subject changes. Now, those are the 4 types of words: namans, sarvanamans, right? Kriyapadas, visheshanas, avyayipadas. Nominals and pronominals, verbs, adjectivals, and indeclinables. The interesting thing happens now when we take one category of word and push it into another. For the last 2 segments, actually, we've been looking at how to take verbs and turn them into indeclinables, right? Take the roots, the dhatus, and turn them into tumonantas, the infinitives, kartum, khaditum, vaktum, or we turn them into twantas and lyabantas, the gerunds or absolutives or converbs, gatwa, kritwa, khaditwa, uktwa. These are all verbs that turn into indeclinables. In this segment, we're going to look at how verb roots can be turned into nouns now, which will have to then be declined in case and number and gender. These are verbal nouns is what we can call them. And Sanskrit has actually a number of different terms for them based on the ways that you use to form these verbal nouns. So for example, if we had the verb bhuj, to eat or enjoy, you can create the verbal noun bhojanam in the neuter, which means the act of eating. It also means food, actually. You can also, from that same root, create a masculine noun, bhogaha, which means enjoyment, satisfaction. You can also create the feminine verbal noun, bhuktihi, which means eating or enjoyment, satisfaction, same thing. These are 3 different ways to form verbal nouns, 3 different pratyayas that you add, and they all create what you can call action nouns, verbal nouns, actions that function as nouns within your sentence. The one I'd like for us to learn here, which is the kind of the easiest one to learn, is what's known as the lyut pratyaya in Paninian terms, and it involves taking the root, gunating it, and then adding the suffix ana and this is going to create a neuter verbal noun, always neuter in gender, has the basic meaning of the act of xing. So kadanam, the act of eating. Panam, the act of drinking. Asanam, the act of sitting. It actually also means a seat, an asana, throne. In yoga, it means a posture, right? The asanam, the act of sitting. Vedanam, the act of knowing, perception. Karanam, the act of doing. Gamanam, the act of going. Shravanam, the act of hearing. Notice that the O plus the internal sandhi here is going to turn to shrava, just like we did with bhavati, bhavati. Speaking of that, we can also make the noun root out of bhu, bhavanam, the act of being or becoming. Idiomatically, it also means a home, bhavanam. That's the other thing to keep in mind here, actually, with verbal nouns, is that often they will tend to have idiomatic meanings that become extended away from just the base meaning of the root. It can mean things that are not predictable. Wadanam, for example, comes from the root wad, to speak. It can mean speaking, but it can also mean the mouth, because it speaks. Nayanam, which comes from the root ni, to lead, but it can also mean the eye, leading, or the eye. Maybe because the eye is leading the mind to the world, I don't know. The value of this ana verbal noun, though, this lyut pratyaya, is that it allows you to talk more about the action itself, rather than just having to describe someone doing the action. So for example, if we had the verb hasati, from the root has, to laugh, this would mean he or she or it is laughing, right? Vanaraha hasati, the monkey is laughing. But if we said vanarasya hasanam, now we could talk about the laughter of the monkey, right? Vanarasya hasanam uchamasti, the laughter of the monkey is loud. What we've done here now is, because we've turned the verb into a noun, we can now use it like other nouns and make increasingly sophisticated sentences. Another really cool thing you can do with verbal nouns is that you can kind of cheat with verbs. What I mean by that is that, let's say you've forgotten how to conjugate seventh class verbs, which are really hard, right? Bhuj, the seventh class root meaning eat or enjoy, gets conjugated as bhunakti, right? You have to stick that na in the syllable na in there. The weak stems are even harder because you just have a letter N, right? Tau bhunktaha, right? So it's hard to remember these things. You might struggle with it, but what you always can do is instead use the verbal noun, this pratyaya, the lyut pratyaya, and add the auxiliary verb karoti, to do or make, and you conjugate with no problem. So instead of saying Ramaha bhunakti, Rama is eating, we can say Ramaha bhojanam karoti. Literally, we're saying Rama is doing the act of eating. Aham bhojanam karomi. I am doing the act of eating. I am eating. Vayam bhojanam kurmaha. We are eating. Basically, all we have to do now, we don't have to remember how to conjugate all the 10 classes. You just remember how to conjugate kr, to do or make, and then you attach our neuter verbal noun, this ana noun, and we can form it off of any root, and it's more or less equivalent to the meaning of conjugating the root in the present tense. So if you forgot how to conjugate kri, to buy, it's no problem. Gunate the root, add your ana, turn it into a verbal noun, krayanam, buying. Now you can say aham krayanam karomi. I am buying. Literally, that's all you're saying. You're saying I am doing the buying of something. So if you're buying a book, the book now has to be in genitive in the sixth case. Pustakasya. Aham pustakasya krayanam karomi. I am making the buying of the book. In other words, I am buying the book, basically. Aham phalasya bhojanam karomi. I am making the eating of the fruit. I eat the fruit. Aham ashwasya arohanam karomi. I am making the mounting of the horse. I am getting on the horse. Aham sanskritasya pathanam karomi. I am making the studying of Sanskrit. I am studying Sanskrit. So there you have it, a very useful ana, neuter, verbal noun, this lyut pratyaya, as it's called in Sanskrit. With that, let's stop here. In our next series, we'll turn to a very important and very productive aspect of Sanskrit grammar, which is known as the passive construction, the karmani prayoga. Until then, thanks for watching. See you next next time. Punarmilamaha. Dhanyawadaha.